This is an uneducated, glorified voice note with some Silksong gameplay in the background to keep you entertained. I'm not a journalist, I doom scroll MSN articles, and I have a profound interest in foreign affairs. Today, we're going to talk about what's going on in the beautiful country of Venezuela. Not just about the drug boats and cartels getting AC-130'd off the map, but instead the US infiltration of a foreign nation they've labeled a narco state to control a major oil reserve. I can tell you right now it's straightforward information, but it's a lot, so I've broken it down to two sections: the history and the logistics. First, let's take a look at Maduro and the man before him, Hugo Chavez, and see how we got to what was until last week an authoritarian state. Looking into the country, you can see it's officially labeled a federal presidential republic. What this means exactly, here you go. Hugo Chavez was the president of Venezuela for 14 years, running from 1999 until 2013 when he died at the age of 58 from pelvic cancer, before transferring power to Nicolas Maduro. Now there's a plethora about this man, and his impact in Venezuela runs hella deep, but to sum it up, 7 years before he was president, he was actually part of a coup that attempted to overthrow the government from President Andrés Pérez. After failure, this rebellion was provided the condition to be able to address the other rebels on live TV. This 2 minutes on air was essentially his first act as a politician. Before taking office in 1999, Chavez was released from prison and growing in popularity among the public. His own term's ideology became known as Chavismo, a direct, charismatic appeal to the masses, often framed as the people against the corrupt elite, drawing inspiration from a 19th century liberator, Simón Bolívar, which the national currency, the Bolívar, is named after. Now, there's no way I can paint a picture that appeases to every side, so I do recommend taking a look at the history, but on the other side of the coin, Chavez was closer in ties to Russia and China versus US partnership, and was compared to the likes of Castro in his direction with Cuba. With Venezuela's divided history, some saw his actions as simply a manipulative, skilled speaker. Chavez also hosted a weekly talk show where he would have citizens call in directly so they can speak with him on live television. Terms of presidency can last 6 years in Venezuela with no limit as to the amount of terms a president can have. But these rigged elections were not representative of the Venezuelan people. The initial shift in power to Nicolas Maduro took place in what was called a special election due to the death of Hugo Chavez, and Nicolas Maduro being the vice president at that time. This didn't mean he was immediately in power though, because an election did take place against Enrique Capriles, a member of the Democratic Unity Roundtable, an opposing coalition meant to run against Chavez the year before, which resulted in a long-winded fight regarding the validity of those votes and possibility of voter fraud. But regardless of anything, Maduro was placed in office, and it would be 2 years before the next election in December of 2015. We're in March of 2016 now. At this point, the Venezuelan people have experienced inflation above 50% what it was 3 years prior, a severe shortage of goods, and the financial state of the country is taking a huge hit at this time due to the decreased market price of oil, which is the largest and most profitable resource in Venezuela. We'll circle back to the oil part of the conversation. I think it's important that we understand the people behind the politics to give you a better idea of how that resource is being managed, including with the United States. During Maduro's presidency, opposing party members were arrested and placed in jail. It wasn't until the Democratic Unity Roundtable had reached a majority in the legislature, whose job is to create the laws for a country, that the imprisoned opponents of the Maduro regime would be freed. Now, with social unrest on the rise, a petition raised over 1.8 million signatures to remove Maduro from office. And in May of 2016, Maduro declared a 60-day state of emergency that granted the police and army additional powers to maintain public order. There was an attempt to shut that down quickly by the opposing now majority legislature, and Maduro made it clear he wasn't going for that. Thousands marched in protest like the takeover of Caracas against Maduro's regime in an attempt to get him out of office, but courts would declare that petitions were invalid or some other reason to further delay the ruling. And at the end of that year, Maduro had refused to accept the delivery of foreign humanitarian aid, which would signal official acknowledgement of crisis for the country. Another incident during this presidency was the attack on the Supreme Court in Caracas on June 27, 2017. There was a video that was leaked by armed masked men in uniform claiming to be representation for those who oppose this criminal government. Led by a stolen police helicopter dropping grenades on the building and hitting it with ARs, the incident was then labeled an attempted coup, which justifies additional repressive measures. But in reality, this was a fake terrorist attack by the government to justify these changes. Finally, fast forward to 2018 and you have an economy struggling so badly that the national currency, the Bolívar, was basically worthless. Maduro's regime introduced the petro, which was a cryptocurrency with value tied to the price of 1 barrel of Venezuelan oil, a Hail Mary in the oil game. The US Treasury called the petro a failed project attempting to help Venezuela evade US economic sanctions, which effectively cut it off from the global financial system. The National Constituent Assembly was also created to further empower Maduro and his crew, resulting in protests that left hundreds injured or dead. Keep in mind it's only been 5 years since Maduro's taken office. Most people can assume oil is pretty important, but I'm not gonna lie, I genuinely had no clue what these barrels turn into, so after a couple Google searches and YouTube videos, what I learned is it's essential to modern day industry. It's in your car, the machine that made your car, plastics, paints, lubricants, olive oil, heating, it's endless. The demand is definitely there. So now let me take you back one more time, right? Hugo Chavez used the money from the oil Venezuela was making back in 2000 and gave people healthcare, food programs, and provided education. Programs that would be impossible to sustain if the price of oil fell. Now, switch to Maduro. What happens when that price plummets in 2014 from about $115 a barrel to less than $30? Well, Maduro rigs the economy to continue the same spending and create a major deficit. Now, the complex currency system that was created by Chavez was being used and rigged by Maduro to favor military officials. That military elite, controlling state resources like gas, had preferential access to hard currency in US dollars or crypto, insulating them from the Bolivar's collapse. To paint a picture of how this market was manipulated, this exchange meant a much higher value paid only to those elite, and with food or gasoline actually purchased and sold on the black market, what would happen is military officials purchasing and reselling it for huge profit. On January 3, 2026, the US began what was called Operation Absolute Resolve, a large-scale military operation to capture the standing president of Venezuela on drug trafficking charges. It began at 2 o'clock in the morning with US stealth fighters penetrating the country and attacking 2 Venezuelan air bases, while a special force team named Delta Force attacked Caracas and by 5 a.m. captured Nicolas Maduro and his wife Celia Flores. 25 years ago, Venezuela had one of the most thriving economies in South America. What happened? Despite having enough oil to power the entire planet for a decade, that over-reliance when the price declined was the nail in the coffin. They have the world's largest oil reserve with 303 billion barrels. Remember when I said we'll circle back to the oil? Let's break that resource down. Light crude oil and heavy crude oil are the 2 main types it's important to understand right now. 70% of US refining runs most efficiently with heavier crude oil, meaning that the industrial facilities built along the coast on the Gulf require an oil heavier than what the US is actually producing. Texas has 47 refineries and Louisiana has 19. In 2019, 96% of oil imported to the US was heavy crude oil. How many barrels does the US produce daily as of 2025? 13 million every day, a vast majority coming from the Gulf and Alaskan recovery efforts. Before sanctions, 1 million barrels a day were imported to the US from Venezuela alone. During the blackball, China was the leading customer for the crude oil at heavily discounted prices. So, with the US now basically in control of that reserve, it redirects this directly to US soil, who also happens to be in a tariff war with Canada, another major oil producer. There was a really well done explanation by YouTuber Keith D in his video Venezuela Isn't About Oil, and I think he does a really good job at explaining the reasons as to why the US is doing this in the first place. Back in World War I, the world used to run on a system called the classical gold standard, with all currencies being directly convertible to gold. After World War II, when countries around the world feared the risk of another Great Depression, like what happened after the First World War, the Bretton Woods Agreement was created and lasted 27 years. A pact by 44 allied nations which pegged their currencies to the US dollar, which was now the only currency convertible to gold, making it the world's primary reserve currency. At this point, the US has full control over the oil market and monetary system entirely. During Nixon's presidency, the Bretton Woods Agreement ended in an attempt to combat inflation in the US and maintain gold reserves, meaning that the US dollar could no longer be converted to gold. Now there's another group, OPEC, which is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, countries that export a considerable amount of oil which control the market. Some of these countries are Saudi Arabia, Iran, the UAE, and Venezuela. Saudi Arabia, one of the largest members, created an agreement to price its oil only in US dollars, forcing the other members to do the same to trade on that market. In return, they were guaranteed regional security and support from oil producers politically. What developed is called the petrodollar system, where oil would only be sold in US dollars, creating constant demand for dollars again. Oil is the foundation of modern industrialization, and the need is close to infinite. With this cornerstone in the market, the US continues running the world's monetary system, creating unlimited deficits. They can print their own money. Oil has essentially become what gold was for centuries, and with other currencies in the world also being built up to oppose this system, the US will be using Venezuela's rich, heavy oil as a gold mine, figuratively. And what do US refineries closest to Venezuela require to run most efficiently? 70% of them require heavy crude oil, to be exact. This has been a really interesting topic to look into, and with it happening so recently, there's definitely a lot of questions left to be answered. So, as of today, Maduro's elite are still in charge, but the US has claimed it will be a group effort as to how the country will run moving forward. Time will tell what's next for the world, but until then, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you hear from me again. I'll be popping. Sparkles and champagne. I be my fraction royalty, looking sexy, you know that be my name.